Hello and welcome to the Fun Kids Bookworms podcast. My name is Bex and I love books, and this week we've got some absolute crackers for you. We'll be talking to Justin Somper very soon about his Pirate Academy Missing at Sea adventure, but first, it's Chris Haughton. He's got a book called The History of Information. This is a beautiful infographic book all about how we've all received information from the beginning of time, so let's find out a little bit more, shall we? I am joined right now by author Chris Haughton about the new book, The History of Information. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm all right. How are you doing? Very good.
I'm so good, thank you. I've been reading your book and I don't even know where to begin with this because you are giving us the history of information from the very beginning of time, essentially, and we're talking like kind of like language and, this, because I thought of information as a graph or like the newspapers, but you're going really far back, right?
Yeah, all the way back to the origin of language, really. So we go back, I mean, really, it's sort of 60,000 years ago until the present day. So language, drawing, writing, print, newspapers, all the way up to the internet and AI.
And we've got, speech as well being developed, which is really fascinating. The idea of passing down stories. That was how we would hear news a long, long time ago, right?
Yeah, so the elders were really respected because they had lived longer and knew all of the different things that society wanted. So they were really respected and sometimes revered and worshipped.
And you've also got language being developed and alphabets being developed as well. It's really fascinating the way the book lays out the kind of like the genesis of all of the languages coming together.
Yeah, I mean, that was so fascinating to me. I studied graphic design and I just saw this as a big sort of graphic from beginning to end and how drawing evolves and, our alphabet comes from like the letter A comes from an ox head, an upside down ox head with the two horns coming up. And then that turns around to make our letter A. And then from there on, we have all of the writings all around the world and then all the way into print and the internet.
Yeah, you do quite a zippy tour in a good way of everything. So, you've got the printing press, which is obviously a massive, massive deal, to more modern media like the radio and TV and newspapers, which is also fascinating. Like, I love the radio, I love TV. And it's really interesting seeing about how that kind of started up as well, because that is equally important in passing on information, right?
Yeah, and interestingly, a lot of these things actually were sort of really invented by children. So the radio was thought of as a sort of a two-way, almost like a telephone system. They had the transmitter and the receiver. And children were fascinated by this. So they made their own receivers, which are very easy to make with just crystal sets. And they were listening in to kind of shipping news and, ships from hundreds of miles away. And then it was only because these became so popular that radio manufacturers then started manufacturing just the receivers and it became a broadcast medium because that had never been done before. There was no system where it was only just the voices going out and people would just listen. It was always two-way before that.
It's so interesting. You give so many little snippets like that through the book. I mean, I was reading about when you mentioned marathons, and originally that was because one man was carrying news and he had to run for 26 miles to give news of an invasion. And that's why we call marathons because that's the place he was going from. Is that right? Yeah,
that's how important news was. And of course, all the news back then was carried by foot or by horse. And, that's why the Romans were so keen on building really good road networks because that was their internet of the day. That was the fastest way of communicating to each other. And of course, it was always, as we say, all roads lead to Rome. It was always Rome wanted to connect to all of their provinces. So yeah, it was very much like the Roman internet, really, the road system.
And speaking of the internet, you also obviously have to focus on that as well, because there's a lot of information out there on the internet and it's a relatively newish medium compared to what we were talking about.
Yeah. And, I think seeing the history of information, the way this has sort of grown up, you can see how the disinformation and information comes about. Each information technology is also a disinformation technology. So we see that, across the internet, but we see that in all of the media as well. And it's a history of disinformation as much as a history of information.
I was going to ask you about this actually, because you do mention kind of propaganda and scams, obviously online, but also in newspapers as well. I think there was one newspaper in New York that kind of ran a story about the moon, was it?
Yeah, well, that was a bit of a scam, all right. Yeah, and that story, they said there was a telescope invented of an entirely new principle. And this was in the 1830s in New York. And they said that they could see a civilization on the moon. And then they ran a series of articles daily about this civilization, and they got up to all sorts of things, very fascinating scandals with this civilization. So the people were absolutely hooked on this story. And that newspaper, the New York Sun, became the best-selling daily newspaper in the world based on all of these really absolute nonsense articles.
It's incredible. It's such a good story. And I think it proves that, like, we talk about now fake news, but that has always been the case, right?
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's been with us since the beginning of time, really. And we just have to sort of, understand how each information technology is kind of controlled by someone, and, who benefits and which is true and which is probably not true.
Was there a particular kind of period of time or media that you liked researching the most? Like, was it the development of language or was it the internet? Which did you prefer?
That's an interesting question. I really liked the very first city. So that was Uruk in Sumer. So this is 5,000 years ago. And they gave us all sorts of things we take for granted today. The plough, the sail, the wheel, but also the 7-day week and, writing and money. Really, I was just absolutely fascinated by this. Really, sort of, they innovated almost everything that we sort of take for granted today.
And you also mentioned through the book the most popular cities through time, which is, again, really fascinating to see. There was some points when London was the biggest city, but now it's just not at all, and it moves around, it seems.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating, actually, how you can really see it move from the Middle East, from Mesopotamia in particular, and from Uruk. Uruk was the largest city in the world 7,000 years ago till about 5,000 years ago. And then it just spreads outwards. So it goes to Egypt, to India, moving out to China, and then out to Rome. And so you can just see the civilization sort of spreading out as farming does as well.
And you also have brilliant illustrations in the book, I should say. The even the silhouettes of like US presidents as well. They're so well done. You can really immediately see who they are. It's incredible.
Yeah, that was a fun thing, actually. The sort of media studies traditionally takes like a media and says, which US president sort of encapsulates this media. So I had Abraham Lincoln for the newspapers and Roosevelt for the radio and Reagan for TV. So yeah, each different era has a kind of a president that kind of suits that medium and is able to get their message across.
It's so interesting. And I was going to ask you, do you think there is too much information out there about us and the world in general? Do you think it's almost like no one could possibly absorb all of that information, right?
Well, I suppose, yeah, I think today it's more about, what information we should be paying attention to. It's choosing what to be paying attention to rather than looking for information sources, because we are flooded with information coming at us from all angles. So I think that's kind of why I wanted to write the book, because telling the story of the history of information kind of gives clues about, what sort of information we should be paying attention to and which is just generated by advertising and which is just selling papers or whatever. And so you get more of a sense of what is probably more true and what you should be paying attention to.
Yeah, that is a good point, actually. And speaking of paying attention, is there one bit of the book that we should absolutely check out? Is there a favourite page you have or a favourite fact you reckon we should know?
I'm really proud of the page where it traces the origin of the alphabet.
Yeah.
So, it begins with the ox head. Alpa was the name for the Egyptian name for ox. And they used to draw an ox to symbolize ox. And then that eventually changed into just the symbol for the sound ah. And so we see that evolve. And so across time, from 4,000 years ago, it was a ox head. And then 2,500 years ago, it becomes the letter A. And it actually spreads all across the world. So in India and South Asia, all of the scripts are believed to have originated with this same innovation, this same alphabet.
It is incredible, and the book is genuinely fascinating. And I honestly, it's the kind of book you can just pick up and kind of pore over and then come back to a little bit later and still have something fascinating to find. Thank you so much for telling us all about it, Chris. I believe the History of Information is going to be out right now, I imagine.
It comes out on the 5th of September, actually, but it's available to pre-order now.
Grand. Oh, well, I honestly would recommend everybody reads it because it's amazing. And thank you so much for telling us all about it, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much to Chris Haughton for his brilliant book, The History of Information. Next up is Justin Somper. Now, this is a bit different. We've gone from non-fiction to fiction, and it's all about pirates, where one of our gang has some family members missing at sea. I'm joined right now by author Justin Somper, the author of Pirate Academy, and the second one in the book series, Missing at Sea, is out now. But Justin, tell me, where do we meet the gang if we've not read the first one?
Well, we're going to have to go 500 years into the future. The shape of the world has changed. The ocean levels have risen, and the oceans all over the world are governed by an organization called the Pirate Federation. And the Pirate Federation has set up 9 elite schools for the best of the best. And one sign that these schools are so elite is there are only 15 students in each year group. And so I'm going to invite you to travel to Pirate Academy, Coral Sea Province, which is vaguely in the Australia area. Mm-hmm. And we're going to join Barracuda class, who have been at Pirate Academy for about 5 years. They're 11 and 12-year-olds. And that is where the gang, including Jasmine Peacock, Jacoby Blunt, and new kid on deck, Neo Splice, are going to be found.
Now, the gang are a very fun friendship group. I don't want to ruin too much, but Jacoby and Neo have found something out about each other recently as well, which is a big part of their journey. Is that right?
Yes, thank you for not going into too much detail about this. Jacoby and Neo find out at the end of the first book, New Kid on Deck, that there's something special that connects them. And obviously, they're going to be thinking a little bit more about that in the new book, Missing at Sea, although they're also going to be contending with snakes and spiders and storms and skulls and plenty of other challenges.
Yeah, because they're out on this oceans-bound adventure, which sounds pretty exciting, but also absolutely terrifying, personally.
Well, I think, to be honest, most of the lessons at Pirate Academy are vaguely terrifying if we had to do them. So, yes, as I said before, this is Barracuda class. They're 11 and 12-year-olds, and they've been learning to sail, amongst other pirate skills, for some time now. But this oceans-bound weekend that you mention is the first time that they get to sail independently, not with teaching captains keeping an eye on them all the time. And off they go for a whole weekend with some instructions, but things soon start to go a little bit awry for this crew.
Yeah, because there's stuff going on in the wider pirate world, it's fair to say.
There absolutely is. So I mentioned at the start that the oceans 500 years in the future are managed by the Pirate Federation. I should have said the Pirate Federation thinks it's in total control of the oceans, but there's actually now this breakaway group of pirate rebels called the League of True Pirates who are out to take control. And they have some links to some of the students at Pirate Academy. And yes, they're kind of interfering with Oceans Bound Weekend.
Yeah, it seems like quite a difficult weekend without that bit anyway, to be honest. I would be quite concerned about all of the adventures they have to go on. They have to basically captain their own ships, right?
Well, they do. But I mean, let's face it, if you're one of the best, if you've been chosen as 15 kids who are going to join the academy, you better bring some skills to the table. And let's not forget, Bex, these kids do come from some of the most impressive pirate families around. So all their parents are families and they all come from these amazing pirate ships. But during Oceans Bound Weekend, they're sailing slightly smaller vessels. So they can sail those with 3 of them on them.
Now, in your world, what do you think makes a good pirate family? What's the kind of like qualifications that you have to have?
That's a great question. You've got to swash your buckle at all times. I think they're big personalities, these pirate captains. So whether we're talking about Captain Beaufort Blunt, who is Jacoby's dad, or one of the captains that's teaching at the academy, like Commodore John Quo, the head captain, or Mayday Salt, the deputy captain. They're the leaders of the world. Basically, if you want to be anything in this world 500 years in the future when the oceans have risen, you want to be a pirate. So they're strong, they're dynamic, they can be quite unpredictable and quite dangerous at times, and they're kind of exciting and maybe sometimes terrifying people to be around.
You know, you've written about pirates quite a lot. What about them is it that really draws you into that world?
I originally started writing about pirates with another book series that I've written called Vampirates, obviously about vampire pirates. And I started writing that one not because I had a particular knowledge or love of vampires or pirates, but just because the word vampirates landed in my head one day. And I just thought it was too exciting an idea not to go with. And at that point, because I didn't know very much about pirates, I started researching them. So I researched pirate history alongside vampire myth. And as I was researching pirate history, I just found out so many great characters from the pirate past and also wonderful ships. And, you know, you might have seen in Pirate Academy ships' figureheads play a particular role as well. So I've drawn on lots of bits and pieces, lots of flotsam and jetsam of pirate history. But as I've said, we're not in the past. We're quite a long way into the future in this story.
I can see you've got a little Jolly Roger flag behind you there, which I very much appreciate. Do you think you yourself would make a good pirate? Have you ever considered this yourself?
Well, I'm starting to look a bit like a pirate. I'm growing this beard now. So I've got a bit of a nautical vibe to me. And actually, I'm speaking to you from Western Australia, where I've now live, although I'm originally from London. And happily, since I've come to live here, I'm about 30 minutes drive from the coast. So I can spend much more time by the sea. There's also a big river here, the Swan River. And I've been able to go sailing and to finally have some sailing lessons. So there's half a chance in these books that I actually know a little bit about what I'm talking about. But whether I would be a super successful pirate, I'm a little bit skeptical.
I did wonder whether you had some sailing knowledge from having read the book. I was like, well, this is somebody who knows a few sailing words. Yeah, I thought you might do.
There we are. That's what 5 Saturday mornings at sea will do for you. I'm delighted you felt that way.
Money well spent, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, Justin, every author who comes to Fun Kids, I have a little quick fire round of questions with them, if that's okay to do right now.
Absolutely, yes.
All right. So first up is super easy. Books or Kindles?
Books.
Everyone says it. Heroes or villains?
Villains.
Film adaptation or TV adaptation?
A TV adaptation, because I'm getting one.
For this book or for another one?
This one and Vampirates, all part of the same universe.
Okay, wow. Congratulations. When can we see it and when can we see it?
It's early days, so we're just looking at writers for it at the moment. So I can't tell you where you're going to see it or when, but it's all being mapped out and it's super, super exciting.
Oh, love. That's the first time anyone's ever said that. I feel like I've got an exclusive. Excellent. Thank you. If you were a pirate, would you rather have a hat or a parrot?
I think a hat.
Fair enough. Beginnings or endings?
Ooh, beginnings.
Hogwarts or Narnia?
Narnia.
Laptop or write by hand?
Laptop.
Would you rather explore islands or find treasure?
Ooh, treasure.
Yeah, me too. By the way, that is a specific question for you. Obviously, I don't ask every person that question.
But I think you should.
I mean, actually, it's quite revealing, isn't it? Would you rather write 9 to 5 or whenever you fancy?
Whenever you fancy. But you've got to put in a bit of discipline. Sorry, I answered that too long.
No, not at all. This is the quickest anyone's ever done it. It's brilliant. Paddington Bear or Winnie the Pooh?
Oh, don't make me choose between those two. I'll take Snoopy, but the other two, they're a joint.
Okay, I'll give you Snoopy. Okay, no one's ever said that. And finally, this is the big one. Salt and vinegar or cheese and onion?
Now that is quite a challenging question, because I would have said historically cheese and onion, but I noticed when I was back in the UK recently for the first time in 2 years, totally obsessed with salt and vinegar. So that is your answer.
Yes, that's the correct answer. You could say anything for anything else. That's the main one I care about. That's it. Thank you. I agree. Salt and vinegar is the best. Now, Justin, thank you so much for telling us all about the book. I'm assuming as well we might be seeing at least a third book in the series. Would that be right?
Well, I'm working on book 3. I've been working on it today, and I'm working on it at the moment. It's going to come out in the first half of 2025, so next year. And that might not be the end of the story.
What a tease. I love it. Well, thank you so much for telling us all about Pirate Academy, and hopefully we'll get the next one very soon.
Lovely. Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much to Justin Somper and Chris Haughton for telling us all about their brilliant books. And of course, we've been checking out lots of brilliant books recently. If you want to find out a little bit more about them, just scroll back in your podcast app and pick an episode you fancy. That is pretty much it from me today. In the meantime, remember to like, subscribe, and follow wherever it is you get your podcast from. I'll see you soon. Bye.